Welcome, everyone. Sorry for the short delay there. We are so excited to have you all here for the second session of Longevity Plus, Understanding Evolving Lifespans in a Rapidly Changing World. For those of you who I've not had the pleasure of meeting before, my name is Olivia Allan, and I have the distinct honor of serving as the Executive Vice President and Head of Events of Landmark Ventures. We host the Social Innovation Summit. For those of you who may not know us yet, we like to call ourselves SIS, and we are a team, a platform, and collective community with over 16 years of experience in humbly experiences in designing and elevating ways to put a spotlight on groundbreaking ideas and innovative leaders who are changing the world for better. And we host events throughout the year, including our flagship summit, which took place in Los Angeles last month. Sharing a little something personal, as I always like to do, it was without a doubt my favorite few professional days of 2023 so far. I hope you'll enjoy joining us for future events so you can learn more about our community and upcoming gatherings. A great way to catch up with us is at socialinnovationsummit.com. We're always updating our website with updates. Now, today, we are particularly honored to be teamed up with our longtime partners with AARP for this special event series to elevate the national dialogue on issues surrounding longevity. If you were able to join us for our first session, our first series back in April, welcome back, a warm welcome. You received probably a lot of email communication from me, and thank you so much for being here. We are so thrilled to really continue these important conversations with renowned experts and industry leaders aimed at helping you understand how longevity is changing and what it means for the most important questions facing businesses and organizations both now and into the future. In addition to our friends at AARP, we're so honored to be welcoming incredible leaders to our stage. We look forward to hearing from Dr. Yale Aluku from E&Y Americas, Dr. Paul Root-Wooley from Emory University, Ms. Abby Miller-Levy of Primetime Partners, and Tom Kalil of Schmidt Futures. If you missed our first event in April and want to rewatch, we'd love for you to share today's content with colleagues and friends. A link will be shared in the chat box so that you can reach out to us directly for the landing page of the series. You can rewatch past sessions and learn more about our upcoming conversations. Speaking of the chat box, we would love to hear from you. Our moderator today will be fielding questions from the audience to pose to our speakers as time allows. You are welcome to submit your questions to our Zoom Q&A function throughout the event. One little last bit of housekeeping. If you'd like to turn on closed captioning, simply navigate to the bottom of your Zoom window and select show captions. And with that, I am so pleased to welcome to the stage a longtime friend and partner of the Social Innovation Summit, Ms. Staci Alexander, who serves as the Vice President of Thought Leadership for AARP. Staci, welcome to the stage.
Hi, everyone. My name is Staci Alexander, and I am Vice President of Thought Leadership at AARP. As many of you know, AARP is an organization dedicated to empowering people everywhere to choose how they live as they age. Our thought leadership team works to elevate groundbreaking ideas, convene innovative thought leaders, and advance work to change paradigms and surface new solutions so that everyone can live healthy and engaged lives. We are in an exciting era where global investors are making big bets on the scientific exploration of how to advance human longevity. We know that what emerges will not operate in isolation, but intersect with the most pressing health and economic issues of our time. That's why, together with our partners at Landmark Ventures, we are taking a deeper look at the evolution and implications of longevity. Our first session in the Longevity Plus series focused on the idea of longevity interrupted. We had an exceptional group of thought leaders join us in discussing how life expectancy in the United States has faltered as of late and what it means for our collective futures. If you missed the first session, you can watch a replay by clicking on the link in the chat. Today's conversation centers the idea of longevity extended. Despite setbacks in life expectancy, recent advances across health, science, and technology have set out to create unprecedented gains in lifespans and health spans. What are some of these advances? How are they developed? And what's coming down the pipeline? And what are some of the big questions to keep in mind around accessibility and scalability, downstream economic impacts, social and political implications, and the equity and fairness of it all? As we navigate the cutting edge frontiers of longevity, we are thrilled to have such an esteemed and interdisciplinary panel join us to explore these questions and more. With that, I am pleased to introduce my AARP colleague, Dr. Erwin Tan, Director of Thought Leadership for Health, who will moderate our exciting conversations today.
Thank you, Staci and Olivia, for kicking us off. My name is Erwin Tan, and I'm the Director of Thought Leadership Health for AARP and AARP's Global Thought Leadership International team. As Staci and Olivia have said, we appreciate all of you joining us here today for this second of multiple sessions comprising our new Longevity Plus series. A couple of quick notes. We're encouraging everyone to tuning in to enter your questions into the Q&A feature throughout our time gathering here together. And as Olivia mentioned earlier, we are pleased to offer closed captioning for this event. To activate this, you have to make sure you're viewing the event in the Zoom desktop app and navigate to the bottom of your window to select Show Captions. So with that, let's get started. I am also very honored to start off by introducing our panel of experts and thought leaders who can speak to the different aspects of life extension and what it means for our collective futures. We're joined by Abby Miller-Levy, Managing Partner and founder of Primetime Partners. Abby is the investor and advisor to early stage growth businesses in health and wellness space with a passion for transforming the quality of life for older adults. We also have with us today Dr. Yele Oluko, EY's Chief Medical Officer in the business consulting health sector, who brings 25 years of clinical and administrative experience to his work at EY. And finally, we have, but not least, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Paul Wolpe, who is the director of the Center for Ethics at Emory University. He is the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Bioethics Neuroscience. He also sits on editorial boards for more than a dozen professional journals in medicine and ethics, and is the president of the Association for Bioethics Program Directors. So as per a previous conversation, we are all going to be using our first names to allow for a freer conversation. And I also, again, want to invite all of you in the audience to join us through the question and answer function. So thank you all for joining me here today. You are all, the three of you, by design, a very interdisciplinary group. And I like to go broad with our first question. So when you think of all these advances in life extension, what excites you? What makes you a bit uneasy? I'll invite any of you to join us.
Well, Erwin, I'll get started. Thank you so much for including me and this distinguished group of panelists together to talk about a very timely topic. And it's timely because it feels like longevity has really become a word in the vernacular over the past couple of years, and that there is kind of this budding group of people, legislators, innovators, funders, all kind of circling around this topic. But when I use the term like life extension, it has this futuristic, take a magic pill piece of it. And I think that most of us in industry like to think about health span and wealth span as really how we should think about aging on a continuum. I mean, everybody's aging. The minute you're born, you're aging. And so it's really not an issue that should be addressed at age, 65 and older. Longevity is a topic that should be addressed at every age. So what excites me about this is really the opportunity for individuals to have multiple chapters in their life, that we're moving beyond a paradigm of childhood, adulthood decline to really not viewing it in such milestones, but really viewing it again as these multiple layers and chapters in your life. And I think that creates a lot of economic possibility, human possibility, and mental health possibility. But what concerns me is that while a few of us in the industry are really thinking about it in this continuum, the rest of the world is pretty much stuck in this older paradigm of childhood, adulthood, and decline. And our systems are as well. Our healthcare systems are, our retirement savings systems are, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of change that's going to be impacted by this increase in health span, that we're going to have to now really change mindsets and also change some of the institutional structures. And I look forward to talking about that today with this group.
Abby, I completely resonate and align with your comments. Let me just add that advances in life extension or longevity, depending on how we define this, it holds great potential for not just extending human life, but improving human health, synonymous with the extension of lifespan. And the possibility of significantly extending human life, it's a fascinating prospect for science and for individuals. More so, it's coupled with deliberate strategies that are designed to enhance quality of life. I think we'll all agree that we don't need longevity just for the purpose of it, because as mentioned, the longevity without life quality is not the goal. Longevity with the same quality, or indeed with increased quality, is the goal. Life extension research aims to not only extend the lifespan, but improve the quality. And there's so many advancements in medical technology and growing advancements and research in healthcare that lend towards better treatments for age-related diseases that increase vitality and prolong independence in older age. That's an exciting potential. And there are challenges, does raise complex ethical questions. We need to talk about the fact that so doing could exacerbate existing social inequalities. What are the impacts on overpopulation and the resources that may or may not grow with an extended population? A lot to talk about.
So let's start by defining a couple of terms just for our listening audience. So life expectancy is the average age that someone can expect to live in a particular culture. So life expectancy, as the introductory comments remarked, has been going up and just recently has taken a dip partially because of COVID. Some people think there are other reasons as well. Lifespan is the extreme to which human beings can live. Lifespan is considered to be maximized at around 120. And that's been true throughout the history of the species. We have people living over 100 years recorded throughout human history. But life expectancy, the average number of years people live, has increased dramatically in the 20th century. Lifespan has not. And so I think we need to talk about the difference between research that's trying to increase life expectancy, keep people healthy, let them live to the full number of years that they can, and research to increase lifespan. The tech billionaires, people like Peter Thiel, Sam Altman of ChatGPT just put $180 million into a company to increase lifespan. So I think increasing lifespan is an extremely problematic idea, more problematic than most people think. And I'm opposed to the idea that increasing lifespan is a good thing to do. But I'm all for the idea that increasing health span, increasing life expectancy, letting people live healthy, productive lives until the end of their days is a really wonderful and positive goal. Increasing lifespan, I think, is much more problematic than most people think. And as we go on with the conversation, I hope to point out why I think that's so.
Thank you. I was hoping for controversy, exciting conversations, and we got it. I really want to sort of elevate what I'm hearing from all of you, that what we want to do is add life to years as opposed to years to life, right? That we want, and I think what people have described as health span, or is again reflects what we heard about in the last conversation. But when we think about, but yet what's interesting is what has captured the public imagination is this idea of 100-year life. And I want to follow up with this question: when the broader audience looks at this conversation about life expectancy, lifespan, 100-year life, what I want to emphasize like who is able to see themselves as a potential consumer, who's able to see themselves in this future vision of 100-year life, who is able to see and who is able to who would want to buy into this. I want to like build off of that because I think there's the key. How do we expand the potential audience for this? Because I think that's one way we can potentially make sure that any advances that we do create benefit all as opposed to a few.
And that's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question, Erwin. And as we reflect on the fact that there actually are 5 cities in the world that are referred to as blue cities that have an unusual life expectancy above 95 and above 100. And these cities are Okinawa in Japan, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Sardinia in Italy, and near and dear to us is Loma Linda in California, and Ikaria in Greece. There's something going on in those ecosystems, and research has actually shown that each of them have very strict discipline around dietary choices and physical activity and environmental exposure. So we can learn from that. It demonstrates that when we talk about life expectancy in one country or one region, within those countries, there are unique characteristics of people that are likely to be driven by the combination of their genetics and the DNA footprint within which they came to the world. But in addition to that, the addition of responsible lifestyle choices.
And how do we then, build off what we know that physical activity and healthy diets are the only current way we have to, promote, to reduce the biological rate of aging? How do we then take that and think more broadly about, when people look at that, how do you feel do you think that people feel that's a possibility for themselves? Just trying to think of it from the audience perspective, because I really do believe that one's perceptions of your own future, like the perception of aging, is associated with life expectancy well. So I want to, because I'm worried about this as we talk about life extension and something that's been brought up. Do people see that as someone for something that someone else will have, or do we have the ability for everyone to see that this is part of their own future?
So I think there are 2 very different components to this. One is individual. People know what they should do to increase their lifespan. People know that they shouldn't be eating as much fatty foods and that they should be exercising. I mean, this isn't secret. Health professionals have been saying this for decades, but the other side of that is what a society promotes and supports. And the point that Yeli was just making about these particular cultures is that the cultures are built around and support a healthy lifestyle. They support, as Yeli said, a certain diet, and there's a lot more physical activity because, first of all, these societies, not all of them, but many of them tend to be hilly. People tend to walk. They're actually getting exercises in their daily life. We tend to get in cars and drive places. I mean, the culture, it's very difficult to buck a culture to be healthy. Certainly some people do it. But if you're talking about raising the entire health span of the population, then you also have to try to find ways to get our culture to support a healthy lifestyle, something that's very controversial because people feel that it is taking away choice.
And I would add to that.
Abby, go.
What I would add to, and Paul, I absolutely agree with you. We know what to do. We just, from a behavioral economics perspective and behavior change, we don't do it. And I kind of liken it to climate change. The data on climate change was, some would argue it wasn't happening, but it was pretty irrefutable what was going on with climate change. And it really took a much younger generation in their 20s or so to really start a movement. to talk about, I want my grandkids to be able to have a planet. And the corollary to aging is, to me, I see it in my work as an investor in the space. It's a one-to-one corollary between climate change and aging and longevity related technologies, that it's going to come from really a movement of people saying we need to do better. We're willing to commit. We're willing to make change today that might be painful for a better future tomorrow. And so I think that's where, to me, if I had to say part of what we're really missing the mark in the whole longevity space is it's the same 1,000 people talking to each other who are all focused on a population 65 plus. Or when you ask about the consumer should be people in their 20s and 30s. I mean, this is where we're going to start having the behavior change similar to the blue zones and things like that. Ultimately, but to Paul's point, there's many obstacles to get around. So I'm a little pessimistic on the behavior change, but what gives me some encouragement is if we can get a younger generation who has time and energy on their side, part of this movement, not just a group of folks on the phone.
I think what's interesting is that a lot of what you just all discussed right here reflects what the National Academy of Medicine's global roadmap for healthy longevity stated, that they identified healthy longevity as a societal condition, right? It's not individual choice because our choices as individual are limited, but as a societal condition with this vision that by 2050 we could have global healthy longevity, but it will require a cross-sector approach, which is exactly why we wanted to have the three of you here speak very broadly. And at the same time, we have this potential, the potential evolution of new, potential progress of new interventions, scientific interventions, potentially pharmaceutical or technological interventions that could allow individuals and hopefully this important society in general to expand their health span. I just wanted to get a sense of that and sort of the promise of geroscience, that we could potentially affect the rate at which we age biologically. And Paul, this is where I think also want to make sure you have a chance to talk about what your concerns are, but also what the promise is.
So when you listen to the organizations, the companies, and the biotech gazillionaires that I was mentioning who are funding all of this, they're really looking to increase lifespan. That's what they want to do. They want to live to 150, 200, and they will say that. An incidental part of that is they want to live, nobody wants to live to 150 and be sick for the last 50 years of their life. So a byproduct of that desire is to the benefit of us all, which is all the research that they're funding that is going into how to live a more healthy life. And also, as you say, how to try to begin to cope with the aging process early in life. That's certainly part of the agenda. But the other half of the agenda, I think, is very problematic. When you talk to people who believe in increasing lifespan as a desirable, and they'll tell you about how much wisdom older people have and how people will be able to live, work productively for many more decades. And what they miss, I think, is the economic, the political, the psychological, and social implications of that. And I could go on for a long time about this, but I just want to give one example of that, and it's Japan. Japan is the second oldest country on earth after Monaco, but Monaco's tiny and in a sense doesn't count. And what's happened in Japan? Have the elderly been held up as fonts of wisdom? Are they working into old age? No, quite the contrary. IMF says that the aging population in Japan, where, by the way, 30% of the population is over 65, and some people are predicting it'll be 40% by 2050, it means a vanishing labor force, a much higher demand for social services, a plummeting gross domestic product, a shrinking tax pool, and greater wealth disparities. That's what's happened in Japan when you have this considerable increase of people in the older part of the population. And that's just one example of what happens. And imagine if the people in Japan, instead of a life expectancy of 85 or 87, if their life expectancy was 130 or 150, they would become 60% of the population of Japan, and social services would collapse. So I think we need to think everybody wants to live a long life. I would love to see my great-grandchildren get married. But I think there's a deeply narcissistic component to that desire. And so we can talk more about that, but I think people need to be very careful before they try to fulfill individual desires at the expense of what I believe are at the expense of their children and grandchildren.
And I think that's one of the really exciting pieces of the global roadmap, in that it talks about the intergenerational component and how society itself has to change, or how we have to reimagine the various life stages that we now adhere to. And I think these are part of the very exciting questions that there's a lot of potential answers for that. Like, I think what you pose is an important problem. At the same time, I think there are really exciting ways that society and technology could work to make that an true intergenerational life possible. Abby or Yeli?
Erwin, I think that we can look at this in a number of dimensions. One from a health equity dimension, for example. If we define health equity as each individual having the opportunity to achieve their maximum life potential, and if a macroeconomic indicator of life potential is life expectancy, then if we look within a country like the United States and you look at Black and brown people compared to Caucasians, there's a difference in life expectancy. So therefore, are we going to develop interventions and processes that equalize and reduce or remove the disparities? If so, we have achieved life extension to some degree. And then if we compare United States to a Korea or a Japan or Monaco, in America, as of 2023, life expectancy for white men and women was 77. It's 77. But in Japan, it is 87. Korea, I believe it's 85. So somewhere between 77 and 85 should be our aspiration in the United States, understanding all the complexities that Paul has mentioned. So in a way, one could say that Americans, Black and white, do not achieve health equity as measured by life expectancy, because compared to the best performing, if we talk about it being performance, the best performing OECD countries that achieve better life expectancy compared to ours, we are in the bottom 20%. And then the other complexity is active interventions to extend life beyond what is considered the best benchmarks, beyond 85, beyond 90, and to do that at scale. That requires systemic interventions and systemic changes that impact a lot of things. And Paul has alluded, and Abby has alluded to a lot of these different ways of constructing our healthcare delivery system and how care is delivered, the social services and retirement issues, the psychological impact of people who are aged and have outlived their loved ones. And there's also the religious context of people who believe that there is life after death. And if we have a society that is now delaying or deferring the expectation of spiritual gratification, that's a context that needs further probing.
And on top of that, I think, we could talk all day about this, but I really want to emphasize what you, and I love it, what you said about how we have so much inequality in the United States. And the recent AARP research from just this past year showed that that disparities in life expectancy specifically could be expected to cost the US economy 1.6 trillion in 2030 alone, right? So I think that there is, in addition to the human, the moral, the familial cost of earlier deaths for many Black Americans and Native Americans, we collectively are losing a tremendous amount of economic activity, wisdom, and I think that provides us an imperative. Abby, I want to also give you an opportunity to chime in, but I also wanted to post a question from the question and answers. Looking ahead, what are key areas for research directions that hold the most promise or furthering advances in longevity and healthy aging? How can collaborations and innovations be fostered to realize these advancements? And I really want to think about also from your perspective in interacting with the business, right? So take it away.
Yeah, so I think Yali raised a really interesting question. It's back to the terminology. When you talk about healthy aging and putting together longevity and healthy aging, that's very different from life extension. And so, if the goal is to try to raise the bar for all, let's take Americans, for example, so that all Americans have the opportunity to live to say 77 to 87 in a healthy way, that's longevity and healthy aging in my mind. And that would be innovations, for example, like the GLP-2s, the Ozempics, Mounjaros, all of those drugs that help manage, it was obviously, diagnosed for pre-diabetics and diabetics, but have wonderful, side effect, if you will, of weight loss for the average person. And so recently when I was at a NAM conference and a Congress person was talking and someone asked him the question, what's the one thing we can do to fix American healthcare? He said, let's make GLP-2s available to everybody. Now, is that a longevity technology? To answer the question around research, that's not a longevity technology in the sense it's not life extending, but maybe it is, because if we can prevent the extreme obesity in this country and the diabetes, by definition, that is influencing longevity and healthy aging. And so I guess where I'm going with this answer is that I think if we can actually start with the foundational work of helping everybody reach that potential of the 77 to 87 through innovation in drugs, care, and prevention, that would be a wonderful place for our research to focus. As part of that, you will have the telomeres and the brain health and all of these pieces of understanding some of these degenerative diseases that can use bioscience to repair the human body. But I don't think to use it towards the goal of extending life much further. So I think the research areas that, and again, Primetime is a venture fund. We invest in businesses focused on healthy aging and longevity. We stay away from a lot of bioscience because that's not our background, but we have been really interested in the work done around brain health and around the telomeres, just in terms and of cell rejuvenation. So the last thing I'll say on this area of research is if you look at all of the amazing research institutions in the US, this area is still an incredibly small area. And so back to this, the youth are our future, we need to start getting young people interested in studying these topics and dedicating their careers to these topics and getting more MDs focused on a lot of this care. We are just at the beginning of this conversation and we don't have the capacity yet.
Well, thank you all. We have to transition to our fireside chat. When we were talking before the conference, before the meeting, I said, I'm going to say the word life extension. I want you all to react to it. And you certainly have, beyond my expectations, which is really exciting. I want to thank you all for joining us here today. And I want to now welcome Tom Kalil, Chief Innovation Officer for Schmidt Futures, who is going to join me in a fireside chat. Tom, I'm really glad you're able to be joining us. And I wanted to, sort of take this opportunity to, sort of summarize what we've just talked about. And one of the things I think a really interesting conversation, which you've heard before, is this idea that the focus perhaps should not be on extending lifespan, not the 100-year life, but talking about health span, right? And that instead of focusing on how long a few may live, making sure that the goal should instead be that, looking at younger ages at 85, at 75, at 65, 50, more and more Americans find themselves, healthy and able to, live the way they want to do as they age. But at the same time, I also want to talk about how the tremendous progress that's occurring within geroscience could lead to that as well. And that is often, we often get sucked into the 100-year life narrative, but that everyone healthier at younger ages is an exciting part of this. Given this, so I wanted just to have you sort of comment on where you see the future of geroscience might be, especially given the recent declines, but also the potential that we could have new interventions to help us all have that the ability to live healthier, longer lives.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think it makes sense to distinguish between the things that are causing premature mortality and morbidity. And those would be things like diet, exercise, smoking, alcohol and drug abuse, suicide, deaths of despair, social determinants of health. So I think that as a number of as the previous speakers indicated, the United States is spending more and getting less in terms of life expectancy than other advanced industrial countries. And I think that there is an agenda that is associated with these population level health outcomes that are driven by certain types of behavior and the social determinants of health. And so an example associated with that agenda is the continued work of promoting smoking cessation, the continued work associated with addressing uncontrolled hypertension, encouraging healthier behaviors around diet and exercise. So there is a rich agenda that is around the public health and population level health outcomes that I think is really important. I also think that there is an exciting agenda that flows from geroscience, which comes from the observation that the thing that is the best predictor of the incidence of cancer, of Alzheimer's, of heart disease, of diabetes, is age. And that suggests that there may be these underlying biological and molecular level drivers of multiple chronic diseases, and that if we understood what those were at a fundamental level, and we had the ability to perturb them, we could develop interventions that delay the onset of multiple chronic diseases at the same time, as opposed to playing whack-a-mole with the individual chronic diseases that are associated with aging. And I think that's the exciting opportunity. And I believe that we're underinvesting in, relative to the potential importance and payoff. But I totally agree with those people who look at how the United States is doing relative to other countries and saying, hey, there's a lot we could do that does not require some new therapy. It's just taking advantage of the types of things that we already know are, conducive to, longer, healthier lives.
One of the reasons why I'm excited to have this conversation is that you are someone who sits, across many different worlds, between science, between public policy, where you've addressed the needs of everyone, right? That's the purpose of government, to sort of focus on the needs of everyone. Also now, as Chief Innovation Officer at Schmidt Futures and the Senior Advisor for Innovation at Sherbert AI, after having been at the White House for 8 years as Deputy Director for Policy, Deputy Director for Innovation and Technology, one of the things that we talked about, I wanted you to talk about, is both the potential, like all those potential interventions, innovations, solutions that are coming down the pipeline. At the same time, this concern that was voiced that, like, are we potentially, this was from the audience, are we potentially seeing a future where a few may benefit and the general population may not? Because we do know that when new innovations are introduced, people who have greater access tend to have the greatest initial access. So as we sort of develop this technology, can we make sure to be intentional to make sure that these new innovations do not exacerbate disparities, but potentially are focused at solving the disparities in life expectancy?
Absolutely. Well, I would say it's important to remember that these interventions don't exist yet, right? So as your audience will be familiar, there's a big difference between the ability to demonstrate an intervention is successful in C. elegans and in mice, and demonstrating in humans. So I think there's a lot more work to do, both in terms of publicly funded research, but also in the private sector investment that will be required for commercialization. So I think that the issues around equity are really important issues that policymakers need to pay attention to. But at this point, I would say the primary issue is that the government is actually doing very little. And there's a reason for that, which is that within the US government, the agency that would be the sort of natural agency to take the lead on this would be the National Institute on Aging. Their budget has been increased, but virtually all of that increase has been targeted to Alzheimer's by the Congress. So as the Congress has increased the budget of the National Institute on Aging, the budget has been earmarked for Alzheimer's. And I totally understand why. Alzheimer's is this terrible disease. It affects millions of people. The burden of disease from Alzheimer's, both for the patients and for the caregivers, is going to increase over time. So I'm not saying we shouldn't be investing in Alzheimer's. I think, by the way, there were some things about the sociology of the research community that were counterproductive and led them to narrowly focus on a handful of hypotheses like the amyloid beta plaque. But we could have a separate conversation about that. But the consequence of the decision to earmark almost all of the increase in the NIA budget to Alzheimer's has prevented the NIA from playing a leadership role in the field of geroscience and aging biology. And I think that is the no-brainer, if you will, that the government, as a policymaker, the question that you're interested in is, what are we not doing that we should be doing? And my answer to that question is that we should be increasing public sector investment in geroscience. And if you're interested, I'm happy to talk more about the specifics. But that's the main policy failure I see at this point. And I don't think it's a conscious decision. It's a second-order consequence of the congressional decision to earmark virtually all of the increase in the NIA budget to Alzheimer's.
So I was both Deb Whitman, the executive vice president for public policy chief public policy officer at AARP, and I were at the NIA's Geroscience Summit this past year. And I think what was really impressive about sort of this understanding of what the potential future is for geroscience, that we're talking about is not only affecting age-related diseases, but I would love for you to talk more about this, but actually, ameliorate, reduce the impact, even potentially prevent a whole host of diseases that Alzheimer's is one of.
Yes.
But a constellation of conditions that affect everyone from potentially, veterans from, in the United States to, adults who are who survive childhood cancer, to, hypertensive diseases of pregnancy. So there's a whole range of things that could potentially be seen as advancing aging. What are the promises in terms of that? We're many years away. Can you sort of describe for the audience where we are and what are the tracks what are the pathways we have to actually achieving success?
Yeah, so I think that, the research community, even though it's very small, has increased both our fundamental understanding of some of these cross-cutting drivers of aging. So an example would be cellular senescence, So the finding that as cells get older, they don't necessarily die, but they stop dividing, and then can be associated with excreting factors that then drive chronic inflammation that are associated with increased aging. So again, there's the ability that people have demonstrated in mice that if you can selectively if you can reduce the burden of cellular senescence, that is associated with not mice just living longer, but having their health span increase, not just their lifespan increase. I think everyone agrees that it's not terribly exciting to say, I'm going to live another 10 years, but continue to exhibit physical and cognitive decline during that 10-year period and be, less able to take care of myself and have a high quality of life. So I think very few people are excited about the idea of another 10 years if all that 10 years is spent in assisted living. So that's what I think is exciting. I think that there's a saying among futurists that I like, which is never mistake a clear view for a short distance. So just because we have more fundamental knowledge of what some of these drivers are, I think it's quite likely that this is going to wind up being more complicated than we think it is, and it may take longer to develop interventions that are safe and effective. And I think there are some unique regulatory challenges that are associated with developing an intervention where the goal is to demonstrate the delayed onset of multiple chronic diseases.
And so what I'm hearing from you, and I think this was reflected in the conversation I had with Dr. Jim Kirkland from Mayo Clinic, that humans are not mice and that we are still many years off from having this. But as we look forward to this, I think, and this is where I wanted to try to bridge our conversation with the conversation we had among the panelists, is can geroscience also be seen as a potential solution or a way we can address some of these disparities? Because we know that, that many stresses like, serving in the US military or having had childhood cancer or experiencing racism, right, can affect the way that the biological rate at which we age, right? And that many of the disparities that we see, like, increased cardiometabolic deaths throughout the US and midlife over the past 10 years are also related to diseases of aging as well. So as we look forward, is there also that potentially important, and this is all in the future to be determined, is there a potential to also try to ensure that one of the promises of geroscience is that we can also make sure that an intention is to also address disparities by making sure that everyone is healthier, at 50, at 65, and as in addition to living longer, that we will try to make sure that there's more general health span throughout the population.
Absolutely. But I think there's some even lower hanging fruit with respect to health disparities that are associated with things like uncontrolled hypertension, right? I mean, just think about the high bang for the buck that there would be with reducing the amount of uncontrolled hypertension, even if you were just to reduce the gap between the highest performing state, like, Minnesota or something like that, that's making excellent progress on that, versus those regions of the country that are not. I guess what I'm saying is that with respect to geroscience, the main issue is that the policymakers, very few policymakers are familiar with the field.
Mm-hmm.
And the US is not doing the basic things that you would do, like support more fundamental research, increase the workforce that is capable of designing clinical trials, leveraging biobanks, not only in the United States, but around the world. developing the platform technologies that will allow us to measure and perturb multiple hallmarks and pillars of aging, supporting clinical trials, having a much more robust effort to discover and validate biomarkers. So the US is not making an investment in these types of things that is commensurate with the long-term potential of geroscience.
And one last piece. Do you think it's possible that if we were to broaden the promise of geroscience to a broader potential population base, that it's not, because one of the conversations we had is that there's a perception that geroscience is only for those who are already wealthy, healthier, that we could potentially create a coalition for people who want to invest more in it by including things like addressing disparities and other important current social, social determinants of health.
Absolutely. I guess I think to some extent it's a timing issue, right? So I think what you often have with technologies is haves versus have laters. So the lowest income family in the United States now has access to the same smartphone as the richest person on the planet. And so absolutely there's opportunities to bake in health equity. But I'm saying if my primary motive was to the primary goal that I had was to reduce these health inequities, I would be focused on things like uncontrolled hypertension. I would be interested in, why are there much higher levels of maternal mortality for Black and brown mothers? So I think the primary policy error that we're currently making right now is that we're just not investing in the fundamental and translational research. So yes, there are opportunities to do health equity, but if your primary motivation was reducing that gap between in life expectancy between the richest and poorest, I think there are other things that you would probably work on first.
One last question. It was less than a minute. What is the potential role of artificial intelligence in advancing this geroscience?
So one way to think about this is that calculus is to physics as AI and deep learning are to biology. And you may have seen the incredible breakthrough that was made with AlphaFold 2 in terms of improving our ability to predict the three-dimensional structure of proteins, but also to design de novo proteins. And that was made possible because the federal government had been investing in something called the Protein Data Bank. So it's really the development of data sets that allow us to train AI and machine learning algorithms that have enormous potential to accelerate progress in the discovery, development, and evaluation of new diagnostics, new therapies, and new vaccines. So that the availability of data that will accelerate progress in geroscience, I think, is a huge opportunity.
So with that, I want to thank you, Tom, for joining us here today. I want to thank our panelists for joining us earlier, and everyone in the audience, but most of all, our hosts at the Social Innovation team. Thank you all for joining us today. This is one of several different conversations that we're having on the subject, and I hope to see you all here at a future date for a continued conversation.